On behalf of Preservation Maryland and the National Park Service, I want to introduce the Harrison Goodall Fellow, Stephanie Phillips, who will be presenting the Circular Heritage Toolkit. Stephanie?
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, thumbs up if you can see it.
Yes.
Thank you so much. All right. So thank you so much for that introduction. Again, my name is Stephanie Phillips, and I'm coming to you live from Edinburgh, Scotland. Very grateful to be here. I am presenting my fellowship project titled the Circular Heritage Toolkit. And that consists of 6 elements of localized, inclusive, and culturally rooted building reuse ecosystems. And I'll share more about what all of that means in just a moment. So before I begin, I want to express my immense gratitude for Harrison Goodall's generosity in establishing this fellowship. It is so needed. And sincerely thank the rest of the committee for their feedback, guidance, and most importantly, enthusiasm. I can't tell you how much your enthusiasm means in putting together this fellowship project. So I feel so grateful that I got to pursue and complete a project that is really, really important to me, and I believe really meaningful for our field as we look to the future of what heritage conservation is for our communities. And I also want to thank my mentor, Susan Ross, for her generosity with her time, expertise, and feedback. She made the final product better in so many ways. That is like a sincere understatement. So she's amazing. Thank you so much, Susan. And of course, all of my peers and reviewers, you know who you are. Thank you for being my deconstruction and circular heritage hype people. That is truly what my community is a hype group, which is so awesome. So what I want to do first is ground my presentation kind of in what I've been doing been fortunate enough to do for the past 5+ years at my employer, which is the City of San Antonio's Office of Historic Preservation, a municipal preservation office. And as of March 2022, I am the Deconstruction and Circular Economy Program Manager. And to my knowledge, this is the first dedicated position for deconstruction in a heritage conservation organization in the US, which is great, but it's hopefully not the last. And in my role, I've been primarily leading an initiative to develop a deconstruction ordinance for San Antonio. And it's all led through a heritage conservation lens, which is also very unique. And on the screen are images from 2 deconstruction contractor trainings that our office has organized in the past few years. So yes, a bulk of my work focuses on the way that buildings come down. And that may seem counterintuitive at first when we think of heritage conservation, but I want to share my favorite anecdote from one of these trainings. So the top left picture, the one with kind of the trees and all of the windows and doors in front of that structure, that was taken at our first contractor training, and it was actually at a National Park Service owned property near one of the San Antonio missions. And that 1930s era homestead, which had been added onto for a number of years, it was truly a Frankenstein house, had to be removed by the federal government to create a park and a campsite. But the superintendent there, one of our longtime partners, suggested it as a deconstruction training site, which was awesome. And we were able to go into that site, hire a national trainer to teach existing demolition and general contractors in San Antonio how to remove building materials from a historic building in a way that kept them in their highest and best use. And what I mean by that is you see kind of these boards on this particular property and these stacked in the back. You know, we're trying to make sure we're training them to, if you're picking up hardwood flooring, to keep it as long as possible. If you're taking out the windows and doors, to keep it in their frame so that it can be reinstalled, ideally in a historic property that's being repaired somewhere else in the neighborhood. So that's what they were learning. But in the context of heritage conservation, you see this picture here. What we didn't know when we were going into this property was that, one, it had a basement. And some of y'all may be like, yeah, whatever. There are not a lot of basements in San Antonio. I'm from Wisconsin. That blew my mind, but it just does not happen. And you can see a bunch of bottles here. So with our historic knowledge of this particular area, it was very likely that this building served as like an illegal moonshine factory for a speakeasy that was down the street during Prohibition. And because this was a National Park Service property, it had been documented, right, all of the mitigation of the loss of a structure, and none of this was part of the historical record. So I really love to share this example of what we were able to uncover that is relevant to our field and the story of a site and a neighborhood and a place, that is done simply by giving us the opportunity to explore kind of the development of a property through peeling away the onion of a historic building. So my job is really cool, if you can't tell. So demolition, as we know it today, smashing and wrecking, it's just so pervasive in our cities. We all know that is a byproduct of what we can call a linear economy, which is a take-make waste system that facilitates the continuous mining of our natural resources, the creation of single-use products, and of course, the widespread landfilling of materials, including buildings. And by and large, our entire lives, our entire world can be defined as linear. There's a Dutch organization that determined that our world currently is about 9% circular, meaning we take back 9% of what we make every year, and about 91% of what we make is thrown into a landfill. That is not sustainable, especially when we think about our buildings. And then in contrast, I love this graphic on the left because it defines this so succinctly. We know about a recycling economy, which is a little bit better, but a circular economy really aims to reduce waste and maximize existing resources by prioritizing reuse, repair, and renewability. Sound familiar? That's kind of what we do. So when we started talking about a deconstruction ordinance in San Antonio about 4 years ago, from a historic preservation perspective, we kind of had to jump into the idea of what a circular economy was, especially for the built environment. And as the primary lead on that project development, I uncovered a lot of policy toolkits for architects, sustainability professionals, a lot for businesses, product designers, and then policymakers broadly defined, but there really wasn't anything that connected the circular economy with the heritage conservation field. So over the years, I've kind of been collecting little crumbs of what that means. There's a lot of great academic research led by my mentor, Susan Ross. She's amazing, but really nothing that we could hand over to an organization like mine to say, here is what you should be thinking about when you're developing a deconstruction ordinance that is through a heritage conservation lens. So this fellowship project really sought to create that. And the whole intent is to make it widely available to our field as kind of like the first step in figuring out what that looks like in practice. So the first thing that I really wanted to make sure that this fellowship did was really define what circular heritage was. This is kind of a new term. And it really came out of really the Venn diagram of what the circular economy is and what heritage conservation is. So you can kind of see when you read through the circular economy list, design out waste, localize economic prosperity. They may not say historic preservation, super loud, but that's a lot of what we do, right? We want to localize economic capital. We want to employ local workforces. We want to restore our existing buildings. A lot of those ethos are the same as the circular economy. So this really kind of susses out that intersection, as you see in the middle in this toolkit. And of course, I mentioned that kind of the subcaption of this toolkit is reuse ecosystems. Why that? Through the development of this project, I really realized that the whole goal is to make it easier to reuse more things and not throw them away. And that can apply to entire buildings, or that can also apply to building materials. So this is really kind of defining how our field helps support that. Something that was a criticism from my own work in heritage conservation and staffing a landmarks commission, because that's what I did before my current job, was write recommendations and work with property owners, is a lot of times we'd be like, you have to restore your windows. And a lot of communities say you have to do it, but they don't tell them how, right? They don't provide the resources how to do that. So this is really building on the why, which we're very good at communicating, why preservation is important, but we need to define how we do that. And reuse ecosystems is a really good way to define that. And the quote at the bottom is from the toolkit. I think it really kind of susses out what I'm communicating is, without providing a clear path to the reuse of materials as an alternative to new items, both in policy and practice. So like windows, doors, siding, all of the things that we want to avoid when we put them into new or historic structures. widespread dependency on new products will just endure. We need to figure out the systems framework to make that less difficult to reuse. So structural change to support our collective ambitions of reuse at all scales, both the building all the way down to those materials. And these are the goals of the toolkit. Sorry, Canva. It's too fancy for me. So the toolkit accomplishes three things: inform, inspire, and activate. So when I say inform, define and reframe heritage conservation in the context of the circular economy. Inspire, showcase best practices and case studies that are already happening at this intersection, because so many different people are already doing this work. And I want to show that it's possible for other organizations to do the same. And then activate, this is my favorite. It's do action, do stuff in your community, make things happen. So provide resources, strategies, and recommendations for our practitioners in our field to help them contribute in this intersection. And this is the fancy little, table of contents. So we have an introduction and then the 6 elements that comprise how we can, make more functional reuse ecosystems. And then the conclusion is my favorite part of the toolkit, because it talks about what we can do at a federal level or like a actual field level to kind of move things forward and reuse more building materials in a way that is culturally and historically sensitive. So again, this is kind of how the toolkit is structured. We have these 6 elements that comprise the framework for advancing circular heritage and reuse ecosystems. And then those are broken down into recommendations. And those recommendations include 4 different types to kind of showcase what might work in a community of any size. We have a physical action like hands-on event, training, or demonstration project. Policy action speaks for itself. A planning action, so kind of putting the wheels in motion, but maybe it's not a physical action or a policy action, but kind of exploring a new partnership, forming a committee, and then a community action. So an event or a community-led project that is really local to a particular place. And I like to define these. The 6 elements are kind of like building blocks, how you can kind of stack these things to get closer to more reuse. Excuse me. And then the strategies are kind of the modalities for how you can get to those building blocks. So circular heritage, as it's defined, is a systems solution framework to heritage conservation that views the continuous reuse of buildings and their materials as a basis for local and economic prosperity, social equity, and urban and natural stewardship in the face of climate change. So kind of the thought change here is that in recognizing this moment where climate change is very real and we have to do something, we have to align our fields more closely with the climate space. Deconstruction and reuse is a form of heritage conservation. The reuse of reclaimed building materials is an environmental, social, and economic and cultural good. And then this can be used as a way to bridge our field with other sectors and develop more interdisciplinary and intersectional policies and projects, which is so important moving forward. So again, these are the 6 different chapters. And so we have data-driven documentation, which is one of my favorites, like really focusing on how we can take data, leverage it, and communicate it. Equitable material reuse pathways is the how. How do we get more reclaimed building materials and how do we put them back, ideally, into the restoration of historic buildings? Robust reuse workforce. I know that's super relevant to a lot of people on this call. So not just training our traditional trades, but also training it in deconstruction and material reuse and how we can put that in the frame of traditional trades. Community-centered engagement. So how do we communicate this to our community and make sure that everyone understands that heritage conservation is a form of climate action? That is like my life goal. Mm-hmm. Interdisciplinary networks and partnerships. So how we partner better with our peer organizations. And of course, place-based policies. So there are several examples of that in the toolkit. So I'm going to jump to the end here because I could talk about this for my entire life. But as I mentioned, conclusion is my favorite chapter in this toolkit. It has recommendations for how we can advance this at the federal level. So expanding for global relevancy, implementing federal level guidance for the reuse of building materials, which I find to be really, really important. And then create more circular economy positions in the heritage conservation organizations. That is a personal goal of mine as well. And then this is broken down more descriptively in the actual toolkit, but really kind of focusing on how we can make this happen on a national scale and inspire action, which is our goal. So I'm really excited to share that the toolkit, from the beginning, I wanted this to be very accessible, designed well so people could read through it, something that is disseminated and expanded upon in the future. So I'm not going to be at the NAPC forum, but there is a presentation called Why Your City Needs a Deconstruction Ordinance Now. And this will be talked about there, which I'm very excited through my peers that helped review this. And then these are just an upcoming list of confirmed places where this will be disseminated widely to the heritage conservation field, which is so, so, so exciting. And with that, I want to say thank you. This has been an amazing experience, and I hope that this really does inspire actionable outcomes in the future. So thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bravo.
Yeah, so very good timing. Right on time for Q&A. So does the board have any Q&A to ask and share?
Very, very impressive is what I would say. I enjoyed reading through your preliminary when it came through, and so many things to appreciate about what you've thought about.
Thank you.
I find the same thing, and it's a learning lesson, certainly for me, because my brain has been stuck on save everything. And of course, my we can't. I realize that we can't do that, and the result is that we throw a lot of that stuff away and keep on going, and the tough part that I could see is convincing the community and others that this is a necessary thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that you've gone out on the edge, and quite frankly, by your enthusiasm, I think you've gone over the edge here. You're bringing to this not only a background, but also an excitement and an interest and an encouragement that these are things we need to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, at the very least, one thing that I hope, even if communities aren't eager to like jump in and say, I want to start a deconstruction ordinance like San Antonio, because I know that is not the current reality, is that if deconstruction ordinances continue to be developed in cities, for them to know that there is a resource for them to be able to communicate with whoever is leading that project and kind of feel confident that they can make sure that heritage conservation in their community can be included, and they can help give feedback on, if we're taking down historic buildings, we should make those building materials available to affordable housing projects of the similar construction era. Like that is a really good example of kind of how we want to create that circular reuse system in a way that makes, the repairs that happen to other historic structures more sustainable and longer lasting. Because I think we all know that, a Home Depot board isn't going to last as long as an old growth, siding board. So if we can really contribute our knowledge and expertise in materials conservation and documentation and oral histories and all of the things that we're already so good at to the conversation around climate action and circular economy, that would be, enough for me. So that way we can, make sure that our field is contributing to those discussions.
Stephanie, the tough question also, and something a real concern of mine, is how do you propose spreading this word?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're going to be including all of this at those conferences that I mentioned, which is already a change of heart. Like you wouldn't believe, like we started submitting deconstruction proposals years ago, and the trust APT were like, no, why would we include that? And it's starting to become something that is more embraced, like broadly and nationally, because these discussions are happening more often in communities. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that they need to contribute to that in some way, or at least be prepared for it. So I think that is one key way. And then I'm very excited to share that the Climate Heritage Network is very interested in kind of making this toolkit like adapted to a global level. So there are circular economy professionals in heritage conservation organizations in Scotland, in England, and they're all part of this network. And they're like, yeah, we should be making this more widely available to heritage conservation worldwide. So that is actually a next step that is already moving forward with this particular toolkit, is expanding it for global relevancy, which is so exciting.
Yes.
That's very exciting. And that sort of ties into a question that I have. Have you gotten pushback on this? I realize that there are historical attitudes that would have in the past made it a hard sell, but how about now?
I think, excuse me, day by day, it's getting a little bit more palatable. One thing that we've learned from our own experience in San Antonio is we've really led with the message, deconstruction is not a preservation alternative. It is a demolition alternative. So once we've exhausted all of our particular methods of saving a building, right? And instead of our field kind of removing ourselves from the conversation once we know it's going to be lost, we stay there, we stand our ground and say, it is also very imperative that we reclaim as many materials as possible for local reuse from this building if we can't save it, right? So that has been really successful with our local community. Like our preservation organizations in San Antonio love this. And something that's really important too is that when we started talking about this, we heard from our own historic district residents. They're like, we know that we can't save everything, but we don't like it when we see a bulldozer come down and demolish a building in one day after we tried to save it for 6 months. It's very violent, it's very fracturing, it's a form of community erasure. So it just listening to our community say deconstruction is preservation, because you're kind of like respecting the building at its end of its life. If we want to kind of analogize that and personify it, that's also really important too, is for us to keep an open ear and really understand that this is how our own residents, our own building stewards see this happening, and they really want that to be more connected to historic preservation. So no matter what, like we'll keep elevating this discussion. I think it, again, is, as time goes on, it's more, people are more open to it, but we're definitely committed to, furthering the conversation, forever. That's kind of my life's work at this point. So I will always be here advocating for that to happen.
And Stephanie, we have a question from Catherine. Her connection is poor, so she typed it in and I'll read it for her, and also combine it with a comment of my own. With the Campaign for Historic Trades, we're working with a partner to make a deconstruction apprenticeship. And Catherine's question related to that too is, can you speak to what kind of training in deconstruction looks like? How many days and what is covered?
Yes, what an amazing question. So from our experience, there are kind of two different scales of deconstruction training. One is the example that I showed you at the beginning, which is a contractor training. So people that already know either how to repair a building or take a building down, they have OSHA training, they know how to use power tools. So that is a shorter training. It was 3 days long. And that is focused on, okay, you have a baseline knowledge of how to do this work, but we're actually going to show you how to take a building down, unbuild it in a way that saves the maximum amount of materials. And that also is imbued with kind of these understandings of why that is so important to the community. And in the toolkit, I would definitely recommend checking out Repurpose Savannah. They are amazing. They are an all-woman-led nonprofit that focuses on deconstruction and documenting buildings as the buildings come down. So the most perfect intersection of historic preservation and deconstruction. So they have a longer training, right? They actually have integrated that with Savannah Technical College. So it's a 1-year program. And then we've also seen something smaller where it's a workforce training. Someone wants to enter the field for the first time, but hasn't used tools. So they get OSHA training at the beginning, they figure out how to do all of that, and then they learn how to unbuild a building. And that can last, several weeks. So it's definitely flexible and customizable to whoever is taking the course. And there are a lot of great trainers nationally that can do that work. So I'm so excited to hear that. Wow.
Repurposed Savannah's who we're working with on the design. So lots of synergy.
Gosh, that's music to my ears.
Great. We'll have to keep talking about it, in particular with the publication of this toolkit. We'd love to promote it with the campaign. And I'd like to know then, what are the copyright with it? How can we share it out? How can people use this toolkit? Across board internationally in the country.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely planning to make it open source, but we should definitely talk more about what that looks like for y'all, because that's very exciting.
We're close to the time, but did anybody have last questions for Stephanie before we close out this presentation?
I hope to hear a lot more about this, Stephanie, into the future. And not only just me selfishly or personally, but also of others being able to look at this and think about it. And thank you very much for bringing that together.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone.